Alright guys, what's going on? It's your boy Labradoodle. I think this is part 7 of Road to Data Analyst. So I ended up doing the behavioral stuff, which took me probably more than I think it should have. I think. I'm not sure. But yeah, I just want to go over some of this behavioral stuff that I did. Um, Customer obsession, received a call from a customer, used a third-party vendor, service product asked to release on route. Basically, me talking about kind of like a two-door uh, risk I took. Couple called in. Actually, this was recently, but they had called in. They used DoorDash, and I realized they had placed an order through DoorDash as a pickup. So the lady called and was like, "Hey, we ordered this a while ago. It's not here." So I explained to them. I said, "Hey, look, it says pickup." And it's like, "Oh, we made a mistake." And on top of that, they were handicapped. So basically, it says that the owner was suggesting that we just give them the refund and then deal with DoorDash. And I felt bad, so ended up sending out a trainee. That was my reasoning, just because it was a simple task. Trainee was still learning, couldn't really help us in house really at that time, so just made sense for her to do that. Customer was happy, so. This one was a project that I took on. This is an ownership principle and a customer obsession principle. Uh, we took on a project with the Girl Scouts of America. It was a camp which was down the road from us. So I constructed an Excel sheet. We did the Excel sheet. It plotted out what we needed to order in order to to provide the camp with all the menu that we made, like what meats we needed to order from our distributor, how much it cost, how much the things weighed, what we needed, how many more extra things like cookies we needed to throw in the bag of lunch, stuff like that. So the following year, they asked us to do it again. I had to make the decision that we just didn't have the staff to do it, because we had dedicated one person in the morning just to take care of that whole project throughout the summer. We just didn't have the staff. I handed it over to pretty much the corporate store, which was located in Naugatuck. Followed up with them, and then the manager actually reached out to me and said, "Hey, like I don't know what's going on. Like, they give me no information." I was like, "Hey, we wrote out an Excel sheet for you guys. I think we wrote out an Excel sheet and shows what's this." And then she really didn't know how to read it, so I kind of gave her a tutorial on that. That kind of just goes into that. No issues there. This was another of bias for action ownership kind of thing, kind of going beyond the Call of Duty. The franchisor had suggested we hire or use a company that didn't use, but try to give jobs to people with disabilities. Um, they set us up with a person. His name was Danny, and he was autistic. In the beginning, he had a helper with him, and we gave him like pretty simple tasks to do around the whole store, pretty much cleaning and organizing and stuff like that. So he didn't really make sandwiches, just didn't have the ability to do so. But one day he approached me and was like, "Hey Jeff, how come everybody leaves on time?" And I said, "Hey Danny, you can leave on time when your tasks are completed." So I said, "Hey, look, I'm gonna stay with you for about a couple weeks. I'm not gonna hold your hand, but I'm gonna guide you and tell you what you could improve on and things to do." Kid was amazing. Like he ended up becoming one of our greatest employees in that position for a long time. And still try to keep tabs with him, and I think he's carried that kind of like effort and that that teaching to any future things he's done. He's moved on to a grocery store. I don't know what he's actually doing now, but kid's doing good, man. Oh, yeah, this is a story about a time when we had a retirement community event going on. We basically set everything up. We gave this kid a chance to do the whole catering by himself. He ended up messing up. They ordered a party grinder. We get a call back. There was no meat on the party grinder. We ended up having to go back to the site, getting booed, put the meat on, gave him. I think we gave him a I don't know if it was free or it was close to it on the catering, and then we told them next time you want to do catering us, you know, it's like half off. So they ended up coming back to us, and we never did a mistake after that. So this one was a prioritization principle, trying to prioritize what's needed, and it's more a logistical type of thing. Had pretty much 3 deliveries going 3 separate ways, and we narrowed it down to, hot foods were more sensitive than cold ones, and just kind of communicating to uh, the people on site and explaining to them the situation. And a lot of the times when you talk to um, people who buy from you, whether it's like large catering, and you explain to them the possibilities, they're willing to give you a little leeway. Especially it's a cold thing, like a cold, like sandwiches and cold stuff that don't need to be like time sensitive in terms of food temp. Um, I think those are the people are they're more lenient than you think. They might have like they come off as having strict guidelines too when they're serving certain foods, but uh, most of the times I feel like these people are more want to get they don't want to they want to set a time and not even think about it. But if you tell them your situation, tell them that hey, we're bogged down, we don't have as much staff to do the delivery on time, can we come in there earlier? And you talk to them, and they're willing to kind of help you out as well. So that's my behavioral questions going forward. And now I'm actually moving to SQL, which is crazy. So I'm gonna watch a couple of these videos and kind of just get started on this. So got everything up here. So let's look at this SQL. I don't know how many videos. Looks like 25 minutes.
A burning question for a lot of a burning question for
Oh,
a lot of students.
sorry. Let's just transition. Oh, sorry. I didn't even show you the behavioral stuff. Yeah. So yeah, let's go back to kind of the behavioral stuff. Um, I was explaining it. Sorry. Yeah. So this is stuff that I did for behavioral questions, which I was alluding to, which I didn't even show my screen, but customer obsession, ownership, customer obsession. Some of these I feel like overlap, so I kind of categorize them in the same manner. Disagree and commit, customer obsession, ownership, customer obsession, bias for action, ownership, customer obsession, disagree and commit, ownership, all tangled in a three, and prioritization. So, yeah. Again, this kind of took longer than I thought. And we use star method, situation, task, action, result. So, and we are doing this, mastering SQL. And we're going to look at the video and check it out.
Students that join Data Engineer Academy is how do I learn SQL? How do I tackle SQL? How do I learn it efficiently? And how do I learn it well enough to pass data interviews? Now, I'm going to give you some best practice advice here. And this advice is based on what our best students have been doing under our guidance. So we've done this for several years and we've kept improving, adding more resources just to make it easier for you guys to tackle SQL. So SQL or SQL, Structured Query Language for querying the database, is the number one data skill. Whether you're going into data engineering or data analyst positions, this is the one that's a must-have, and it's present in all of the data interviews, except
What's it called again?
the database is the number one data skill. What more resources just to make it easier for you guys to tackle SQL. So SQL, or SQL, Structured Query Language for querying the database, is the number one data skill. Whether you're going into data engineering or data analyst positions, this is the one that's a must-have, and it's present
What did you
in
say about
all.
structured?
Is the SQL, or SQL, Structured Query Language for querying the database, is the number one data skill. Whether you're going into data engineering or data analyst positions, this is the one that's a must-have, and it's present in all of the data interviews except some very senior roles. So here we go. What you're seeing on my screen right now is just a template of a personalized plan. Now, a similar plan is available on our Emerald, Gold, and Diamond programs, so you may have seen this before. If you yourself don't have a personalized plan, don't worry, you still most likely have access to our website and our school community where you can access different weekly coaching calls. So let's scroll over here to the yellow area because as your success coaches should advise you, you should not just wander around our huge website doing everything, even doing everything that's for SQL. You should focus on what is right here in your personalized plan. This is why I'm focusing on that. First step when it comes to the SQL milestone is watching a video. SQL, the most important skill. That's just an overview of why SQL matters and how much it matters. There is an important note there. Do not do Mode. Mode is a website external resource. We have more than enough resources on our website, my.dataengineeracademy.com, so that you don't have to resort to external resources. This video right here is quite old, dates back over 2 years. And in it, Chris mentions the Mode website. That's irrelevant at this point because this website that we have and the plan that you have contains plenty of resources. Moving on to the tutorial. If you're a beginner, you would want to go through all the lessons. And we section the lessons and categorize them into beginner, intermediate, and advanced. So you can see 3 different links here. This one, and it says do all beginner lessons. Now, let me open that because I want to show you the proper way to do the lessons. I think I clicked on the wrong link. Let me check again. There we are. SQL tutorial. And let's go to beginner lessons. I'm going to open any one of these. All right. So usually you will land on this. Here's how I recommend you do them. Go to the video and watch the video. The video will explain the concept and you will see the instructor solving the question in the editor and running it. Then I would like you to go to the question right here because the question contains written explanations and several more examples with the same concept. In this case, the concept is the select clause. And right here in the editor, you would be able, let me see, I have to refresh this. Okay, now the editor is ready. You will be able to type the code. The code you type here should relate to, if we scroll down here on the question, to this. So you should type what this is requesting, right? Even though there are several examples here, these are not always able to be run in the editor. Why? Well, the reason behind this is that for every lesson or for every practice question, there is a table in the background in our database that looks exactly as the intended output of this question. So that means that in the background, we only have the table or tables listed here. So there's only the customers table and only this will be successfully run. Once you have the code written, you can run it. This right here is not the correct code. This remained from when I was testing stuff. If you're not sure how to run this, you can always go to show solution, right? And then you will be able to see the actual correct solution, which you can copy, and you can go back to the editor, paste it, and run it. and you will get a message of whether the question passed or was wrong, and it will automatically switch to the output where you can check and see the output table, expected table, and compare it to your table, right? So that's how the UI works. I would recommend that after you watch the video, after you read the question, the written lesson, and read the question right here, you attempt to do it by yourself. If you don't succeed, I wouldn't dwell on it because this might be your first time encountering these lessons, encountering these concepts. I would go ahead and go to show solution and run it. Do not submit the answer. Always choose run first so you can explore the output and see if it's correct. If you submit it, it will automatically take you to the next lesson, right? Let's go back to lessons. When it comes to lessons, these are just introductory. There are a lot of them. Like if you look at how many there are in beginner, in intermediate, and advanced, it's a lot, right? And just because you've done a lesson successfully and even understood the concept and even did that question successfully, it does not mean you've mastered the concept and will be able to use it again in a different context, right? So these are the beginner lessons. If we go back to the plan template, you will notice a second section here that for intermediate and advanced lessons, we recommend that you go to the school recordings right here. Now, why is this? Even though we have video lessons on our website that you just saw, where you saw the beginner lessons, even though we have video lessons for intermediate and advanced, those are just chopped up versions of the full versions that you can see here on school. And unfortunately, some of them have been chopped up too much, leaving out crucial explanations. So once you're done with beginner lessons, follow your plan and go to school to watch intermediate and advanced lessons right here. This is what you want to do. Um, these ones right here were done by me. They were done live. They are imperfect because I've made mistakes. And that's actually good because you can see me troubleshooting. You can see me interpreting error messages. And you can see me explaining much more than what's included in the lessons on the portal. By the time I was doing these group coaching sessions in SQL, I'd already had 6 months of experience here advising students and hearing many frequently asked questions. So if you're not going through these and you're just watching the short video lessons on our website, you're doing yourself a huge disservice. We've seen some people do that, even though it's clearly outlined in the plan that you should watch the intermediate and advanced sessions on school. And then this is where the mess happens, huge delays, questions, confusions about everything that's actually covered here if you only watch the full version lessons. All right, so you watched the lessons. What happens next? I'm sure you'll have confusion. I'm sure you'll have questions. For that, I cannot stress enough how crucial it is for you guys to ask questions on your Slack channels, right? There, and as well to ask questions on SQL Q&A weekly sessions. So if we go back to school, but this time we open the calendar tab, you'll see a calendar with a bajillion different weekly coaching sessions. And you'll see SQL happening almost every day, especially some Q&A sessions. A Q&A session is meant for you to join and ask any specific questions you have. If it's not a Q&A session, that means that there will be a coach live coding, live solving different SQL problems. These are also good regardless of your level because what our coaches focus on most is interpreting the question, breaking down the question, and writing pseudocode. Pseudocode is like a mix of plain English and actual SQL code because this is how the human brain typically thinks. You don't see a question and immediately have the whole SQL code of the solution in your head. You have to do it step by step. You have to understand which tables do I need, which columns do I need, write that down, which functions might I need, what kind of joins do I need, do I need to do this in steps using CTs, etc., etc. So you will see our coaches doing that live in coaching sessions. This is why these are hugely important. Coming back to Slack, how do you ask a question on Slack? So let's say you are doing a question or a lesson you don't understand. Let's say it's here. Doesn't matter really. So if you just give us the URL, I'm not sure why that is, but it won't take us directly to the question or the lesson that you're interested in. So this is like beginner lessons, logical operators. If you give us the URL, it will just bring us to beginner lessons. So when asking a question, please take a screenshot. So take a screenshot that includes this whole path, or you can just tell us the whole path, right? Because we have several tiles. Some are lessons, some are FANG practice questions, and some are data engineer practice questions. Tell us what it is. We need more than the question name. We need to know where it is. All right. Next, ideally, you copy the code that you used, the code that's not working, so that we can figure out what's not working. You ideally use copy paste so that our coaches can also copy that, run it, figure out where the error is. Some other things you can do is, maybe you think you got the right solution, you're comparing the tables, they look similar, screenshot that. Maybe you haven't gotten anywhere really and you need an explanation of this, totally fine. Typically what we see is some sort of an effort, some sort of an attempt where there is student code that's not working quite as expected. So screenshots, copying code, making sure we know exactly what you're working on, and being as specific as possible with your questions so that coaches can help you on Slack. That's what they're here for. That's how you ask questions on Slack. Now, coming back to some study advice for SQL, right? So you've done the lessons. Then you're gonna move on to practice questions within the same section. So if we go back here in the SQL tutorial, once you're done with the lesson, here are the practice questions. Now your plan outlines how many of these you should do, and that depends on your skill gap. Now for more experienced people, you can typically skip beginner stuff, and for others, listen up. Okay, so it says do 10 beginner practice questions, 10 intermediate, 20 advanced practice questions. These refer to practice questions right here in this section. Typically for the lessons, you would have done all of the lessons. Now for practice questions, remember how I said that just because you went through a lesson and possibly understood it in that moment, it doesn't mean you fully grasp the concept. This is where the learning truly begins, once you get to practice questions. You will see questions that are going to challenge you, even beginner ones. And even beginner ones might include some intermediate concepts such as joins and subqueries. These are going to challenge you because it's going to be the first time, if you're a beginner or not very experienced in SQL, it's going to be the first time where you're seeing a task where you have to combine the different lessons, combine the different concepts that you learned. In this case, it is perfectly normal, and not just normal, it's more than expected that you might feel stumped, that you might feel, some of these things are familiar, but should I use count? Should I use sum? Should I join? Gosh, I went through all the lessons and I don't know anything, right? When it comes to these practice questions, you are going to have to refer back to the lessons, right? And kind of give yourself a refresher. So if you're working on a practice question, don't dwell on them too much. I'm opening a random practice question. So in this case, you'll have a question and an output. If your code keeps not working, don't wait too long to go to show solution, right? You don't want to do that. This is your first time doing a practice question. If you go to show solution and you still don't understand it, totally fine. If you don't understand it, even after referencing the relevant lessons, for example, in this one, the relevant lesson would be count, maybe even select from, but I'm guessing just count. Ask on Slack or show up to a Q&A and ask. I recommend always going to Slack so you don't wait for another session. Then move on. Like your first time around, don't worry about having to check every or nearly every solution and not being independent in solving. So that's for the tutorial. Once you've done that a few times, like once you've done 10, 10, 10 right here, even if you've had to check the solution for almost every one of them, go back to them again. So when you're checking a solution, right, let me go back here, Try not just to copy paste, try to type it out. Then come back to it 2 days later. And why am I saying this? 2 days later, ideally, you will have forgotten the code, so you're not doing it from memorization, but you won't have forgotten your understanding of this type of practice question and what kind of a solution it requires. Before you do that, another thing I would suggest, unless you were completely stumped, if you have some sort of an attempt here that you tried that's not working, maybe you put some instead of count, right? Make sure to have a notebook where you're practicing, well, not practicing, where you're writing notes about your practice sessions. So what you should do when you come up with a SQL solution that's not right, you should compare it to the actual one that is right. You should note down in your notebook how it differs from it, and you should also try to map out the requirement from the question to the crucial part of code that you were missing or that you got wrong, right? So this is supposed to be count. So on this example, you are looking for the total number of orders. So you might say, hey, I shouldn't have summed up the orders to get their total number. I should have counted them, right? Think of it in the real world. If you could somehow see a table and each row is an order, you would count the rows, right? So that could be a note for a task like this. To recap, try to solve it for no more than 15 minutes. If you keep getting it right or if you're stumped, check the solution. If you understand the solution, compare it to your code, make notes about that comparison as well as how the question maps to the actual solution. If you don't understand it, screenshots, code, post on Slack, and the team will explain. Some more notes here. No matter how much you're struggling, there is no need to do more than what is mentioned here, even though we have hundreds of SQL practice questions. We need to move efficiently. You're not meant to indefinitely practice SQL. You're meant to be ready for interviews. That's the goal. After that, you might have a mini SQL test with your success coach. They're just going to give you one intermediate question from the tutorial. This is not a mock interview. This is just more of a casual test just to gauge how ready you are to proceed. After that, there are some milestone videos. These are good because in these ones, you'll see what a mock interview in SQL may look like, and you'll see some videos that show you how to solve and break down medium and hard problems. After that, we're getting into some serious interview questions. FANG, and then later on data engineer interview questions. Again, always pay attention to the notes. These tell you how much to do. For FANG, it's 3 of each company. Each letter is one company, so this is 15 in total. I recommend doing one beginner, one intermediate, and one advanced question per company. For data engineer interview
Mm.
questions, you need to do 5 beginner and 5 intermediate. Not even advanced. These are too hard. They contain some mathematical equations that don't really test your SQL knowledge. All right. After the FANG ones, you would have one mini mock. A mini mock is 30 minutes long and will typically test either a beginner and an intermediate or just one advanced question. A full mock tests all levels and you have to do them in under an hour. Successfully completing a mock is not just about coding the right solutions live. It's much more than that. To know what it includes, make sure not to skip these videos here. So in a SQL mock interview, you need to break down problems, write pseudocode, ask questions to the interviewer to clarify the question, to clarify the expected output, right? Uh, you need to ask questions to verify your approach. And you also need to write neatly. Those are just some of the criteria for passing the SQL mock interview successfully. One thing I wanted to add is the intermediate level. That's kind of a deceptive categorization because going from beginner to intermediate is a much bigger leap than going through to advanced from intermediate. So things like subqueries and joins are much more harder to grasp as a beginner then grasping data type specific data type specific functions such as date functions and string functions, and even grasping window functions once you have a good hold on the intermediate concepts. So I want to warn you, no matter how smart you are, if you're a beginner, you're gonna struggle with intermediate. And it's typical to think then, oh gosh, if this is intermediate, what the hell is advanced? There's no way. There's no way I'm gonna ever master advanced. I want to tell you that's a lie. It's a complete lie. We've helped hundreds of beginners nail these concepts. And we've done that before we ever had a single coaching session available, before we ever had any videos explaining lessons. Back then, our students had to rely on our portal and Slack, and that was enough because they were doing it diligently.
Mm.
So even if you cannot attend many SQL coaching sessions weekly through school, even if you cannot rewatch them because we post the recordings on the school classroom, if you're following your plan, like following the steps, following the notes, not going off on your own, if you're doing that, and anytime you encounter an obstacle, you ask on Slack, you're set. You are set. Slack is going to speed up your progression 3 to 4 times. This is backed by our data. School lessons, school sessions, coaching sessions, Q&As are also going to speed up your progress. You will very rarely have a plan that's unrealistic. When the deadlines were set in your plan, your skill gap and your availability to study and the amount of material to cover were taken into account. So let me think if there's anything else I wanted to add. Yes, there is one more thing. Coaches might occasionally send you extra materials. We have some materials such as breaking down problems, using CTEs, using ChatGPT. ChatGPT can be helpful when you're doing practice questions, so it can explain to you in detail why certain things are the way they are. You should use it as a learning tool, not as a crutch, because you won't be able to rely on it during any interviews. I wanted to add that when it comes to our advanced lessons, most of them focus on some commonly used functions, date functions, string functions, but there are many more functions in SQL. We can't cover them all. Um, for that, you might sometimes look up different date functions, string functions, look up commonly used SQL functions. That's completely normal. I do want to say that in interviews, as long as you know what kind of a function it is needed, you won't be penalized for not knowing the exact syntax of that function. And this goes for date and string and similar functions, not for aggregate functions. And the reason you won't be penalized is because different SQL servers might have slightly different syntax for these functions. Our website runs on MySQL, so the syntax is MySQL. Microsoft SQL, Oracle SQL, and so on may have slightly different functions of that sort. What students typically do is revise these functions the date before an interview just to get a refresher on the syntax. Again, don't stress about this. If you know the fundamentals, if you know how to break down the problem, joins, subqueries, aggregate functions, window functions, CTEs, you are golden. Make sure to also practice your timing and practice talking out loud, asking questions, breaking down problems. The SQL Gold Star that we're aiming for is for you to be able to finish a beginner question in under 10 minutes, intermediate in under 15, and advanced in up to 30 minutes. But don't set that as your first goal until you've gone through all the interview questions in your plan at least once. Then you can work on your speed. And that's it. Happy studying. I know you can do this. I know it. You just need to use all the support tools at your disposal, follow your plan, school group coaching, Slack, ask questions, ask your success coach for advice, and you'll be set.
Nice. questions. Oof. All right, I'm gonna check out. I got a Zoom meeting on Thursday and see what's this. Burning question answer. How to master SQL? What you need to do. All right, let's see what this is.
A burning question for a lot of students that join Data Engineer Academy is, how do I learn SQL? How do I
Oh, this is the same
tackle
thing.
SQL here for you? A similar plan is available. And let's go to beginner lessons. Explore the output and see if it's correct. If you submit it, it will automatically take you to the next lesson, right? Let's go back to lessons. When
Hmm. 100 seconds.
Look, the code to losing weight was cracked a long time ago. The problem is, no.
Data is all around us. We used to store data on paper in big filing cabinets, but eventually we stored them online in what we call databases. How do we easily pull the data we want to look at it? That's what SQL is for. It's a language that communicates with databases. Welcome back to Glitch, your easy insights into bots, big data, and artificial intelligence. SQL stands for Structured Query Language. People call it SQL or SQL. In short, SQL is the name for a language that is used to communicate with databases. Databases that store your data. If you want to pull, edit, add information to a database, you can use the language of SQL to do that. But how does SQL work? Think of a database like a warehouse. Data tables like filing cabinets. And data like files, this warehouse or database stores data. The warehouse database was built using coding languages like C++ or C or Java. Now imagine regular Lego people need to access the files. How do they do that? Option 1, you could have a storefront built to the warehouse so that customers can ask for files, add files, delete files. But essentially this means you are building something that takes a lot of time, money. In the real world, this is the equivalent of building a whole app just to access the files in the database. SQL comes in, which is the second option, SQL. This is like you hiring a specialized delivery translator. Her name is Sally SQL. She knows how to talk to the database, and she knows how to speak in the language of SQL. So if you learn to speak SQL, then you can ask her to get files for you. Okay, so how do you speak Sally's SQL language? Here are the requests you could make. If you're a Lego mayor, you want to know the name of your citizens, you'll ask Sally SQL, select name from Lego people. The request to select name, that column, from Lego people, which is the name of the table. Or if you're a Lego doctor and want to know the name of citizens that are higher than 3 centimeters, you would ask Sally SQL,
Select name from Lego height, where centimeter is greater than 3.
She returned 2 Lego people, Sarah and Craig, because their centimeters is greater than 3, and she pulled from the name column within the table called Lego height. Or if you're a statistician and you want to know both the height and age combination of citizens, but this data is stored in 2 separate tables, here's what you'd say to Sally SQL. Not all tables are found together. Sally joined the 2 tables because what both 2 tables had in common, a names column. She was able to join the 2, matching by the names in each table. But you can also do other things. You can add data. If you want to add Joe, who's age 12, or you can update data, make Joe 13. You can also delete Joe altogether. From creating tables to joining tables to altering tables, Sally SQL can do it all. So here are 3 things you need to remember about SQL. 1, SQL is the one language you probably should learn. If you are in business or marketing or sales or anything that you wouldn't normally think you need to learn to code, SQL is the one language you probably should learn. The reason why is because most companies nowadays have an online presence and are keeping records of data on a database. So the more you know how to communicate to this database and pull data, the better you can be at your job, because now you can pull the data, analyze it. 2, SQL languages have variations. Different companies with different SQL databases have different SQL syntaxes. There's small variation, so it's the equivalent of having different Sally SQL bots with different accents. 3, SQL only speaks to a specific kind of database called a relational database, which is essentially a database that has a tabular schema. So it's a lot like a data table with rows and columns. Next time you hear about SQL, just remember Sally SQL. Comment down below if the company you work for uses SQL to pull data from the database. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next video.
Get out of here. That's funny.
Something's missing.
15 minutes?
Hey, Meta,
Learn
I need more activity.
SQL in
Any
15
ideas?
minutes?
You know, anything is usual, right?
Structured Query Language, SQL or SQL for short, is the gold standard language for communicating with relational database management systems. You've likely heard of databases like MySQL, Postgres, Microsoft SQL Server, and Oracle, all of which are based on SQL with their own little variations. It was initially developed in the early 70s to mutate and retrieve data from IBM's System R database. By 1986, it was standardized into the syntax that remains extremely popular in technical applications today. A relational database organizes data into tables, kind of like an Excel spreadsheet, where columns contain attributes or types of data, while each row represents an individual record or data point with its own unique ID known as a primary key. We can establish relationships between data points by taking the unique ID from one row and storing it on a different row in a different table in a special column known as a foreign key. In the teams table, the team ID is the primary key, but in the players table, it's the foreign key. And what that data structure tells us is that a player belongs to one team, while a team can have many players. What we've done here is structured our data in its smallest normal form to eliminate duplication and redundancy. Now, the role of SQL is not only to read, create, update, and delete data, but also to join data together based on the relationships embedded within it. The syntax is comprised of several key parts. If we zoom all the way out, we have a statement, or a piece of code that does something, like reads or writes to the database. Within a statement, we have a variety of keywords that can manipulate the database. Select can be used to make a query for the columns that you want from a table. The column and table names are known as identifiers, but we may not want every row in the table, so we filter the results with the where keyword to only include records that meet a certain condition. It's like looping over every row in the table and only returning rows in the query where the predicate evaluates to true. Then, we might use the join keyword to connect data from an entirely different table by matching the primary key on this table to the foreign key on another table. What we've created is a collection of clauses that make up a full SQL statement. We can now go and execute this code on the hundreds of different databases that support SQL. This has been structured query language in 100 seconds. Like and subscribe if you want to see a full SQL tutorial. Thanks for watching, and I will see you.
All right, let's go. It's time for Senior Español Pop Quiz. What do the enterprise databases like Oracle and IBM DB2 and Microsoft SQL Server, developer databases like MySQL and Postgres, and even embedded databases like SQLite all have in common? Well, you're probably starting to Google right now, but let me just kill the suspense here. They have what's known as SQL in common. SQL stands for Structured Query Language. Now, a couple of quick facts about this particular language, which is used to process and deal with storing of data inside of relational databases. The first, it was invented, do a little I there, invented in 1970. That is almost 54 years ago. Many, many moons before even I was even born. And then roughly around 14 years later, it was made as a standard by the ANSI organization in 1986. Now, the big part about that is that it is a standard that everybody learns as a technology here. And the cool thing about this is they made a way for all these databases to function by being able to store data in a table format. So you're going to have a series of rows and columns, and that is how you store your data. Now, the second part about that is, the big part about SQL is how you compose these queries. And so because it's so portable, once you learn this language one time, you can use it across almost every relational database that actually functions off SQL, off this standard that's there. So let's break down the anatomy of a query, and then I'll give you some tips on how to kind of get started in your learning and really become an expert overnight. All right, the first is you're going to have the actual action of what you want to do. So it's going to start out with the insert, the update, okay, of whatever you want to do, and depending on what you're kind of going from, or a select if you want to read data out. All right, and then you're going to have either a wildcard, which is saying give me everything from that particular column that I have, that row that I have, or you can specify the actual column names that you want. So we'll just say COL1, COL2, you get the gist there. Next, you're going to say the from statement. So you have to tell it, all right, I want data, I want to do this action, I want these particular columns, but where do I want to do it on? Well, it'll be the database name and the actual table that I want to do it from. Now, the last part of that is where you have some condition that occurs, and that can be a filter based upon, like, I'll do a simple one like where ID equals 1, a particular number, or you can do where some other condition, price is greater than 50. Whatever you're doing is really about being able to select the proper data out of your particular database. Now, so that you could do all these queries, they're very easy to do, and then you're going to have ways where you can actually escalate this, because these databases do hold quite a large amount of information, or are very, very capable. And in their nature, they always scale kind of vertically, naturally, by adding more CPU, adding more memory, adding more storage to fulfill the needs that you need from that particular project that you're working on. But let's talk about a couple other ways that you can go. Now, this is a very simple query, but it can get very complicated and very complex. Now, you can read any kind of guide on SQL online, and it'll take you from this example to where you can actually write 2 of these statements and join data together from different tables. It gets very exciting to work with. But as your queries get more complex, you're going to want to go across 2 different things that I want to discuss that should be top of mind when you want to do. The first is what we like to call a view. Now, a view is a way to kind of abstract away the complexity of your particular query, where you can kind of alias it or just simplify it so it's easier to read, it's easier to execute, and it can be fine-tuned from there to work. So in this particular one, if I was doing, let's say we had books and authors, books in a table, we could say select my favorite books as the name of the view, but it actually has this particular context underneath the actual query. All right. So next, on other enterprise, when you start to get to that enterprise tier that I mentioned before, they'll have functionality called stored procedures. All right, so let's do the stored procedures. So stored procedures, we do it called stored proc, and I've worked with this a lot, especially in MS Microsoft SQL Server. So it is a way of having multiple statements that you want to execute in a row. It can get as complex, so multiple operations that you want to do. It even has the capability to be able to pass in certain variables and information that you want to serialize or hydrate this particular role of where they should execute. You'll find other things of doing transactions. And these are very good because they're able to process a series of actual queries. And if something goes wrong, I want you to roll them back. All right, to do all the data there. So, and then lastly, what I love to mention is I do want you to, after you kind of conquer a bit of these, and these are all dependent upon the actual databases that you're using. I had my start in MySQL and Postgres, and then I started to work with a lot of enterprise databases where you had more of these particular enterprise features that you could kind of do, and you pick your database depending on the project that you want to do. But in today's world, you're going to kind of see this particular acronym a lot, which is Object Relational Mapping, so ARM. And there'll be a series of frameworks out there now. You're going to be confronted with that early in your education on SQL, but I highly recommend that you go through the basics first, because what this is going to do is be able to say you map the context of your application, whatever kind of object that you're working with. So say I was doing that, building that bookstore database with books and authors. So I can just say books, create many, or create one, all right? And depending on which database I use, it will actually, the ARM software framework will map to the syntax required for that particular destination database. And so it makes it very, very portable for me to go, and really obfuscates away the ability of writing queries. But I do highly recommend that you get into the practice of writing queries first, work your way up, work with different databases, and then depending on your project needs, the ARM layers do actually make the process of getting started with a project very, very fast, because you don't have to spend time writing all those. But that's kind of the way I definitely want you to learn. It's the way that I learned this and become the expert that I am today. So, in conclusion, This is SQL. I want you to definitely put in the comments below your favorite database that you like to work with and some of your adventures around SQL. I want to hear about some of those crazy queries that you've written before. Until next time, technically yours, Señor España. If you like this video and want to see more like it, please like and subscribe.
Jeez. Let's do one more. What is a database?
With Monday.com's intuitive work management platform, you have the power. Not IT, not admins.
When it comes to data analysis, few tools are as powerful and widely used as SQL. Whether you're talking to a data analyst, a data scientist, a data engineer, or a database administrator, they all have one thing in common. Each of these people knows SQL like the back of their hand. But what exactly is SQL? What's it used for, and why is it critical for so many roles in data? SQL stands for Structured Query Language, and it's what we use to work with relational databases. In relational databases, we store data in tables which are made up of columns and rows, similar to what you may have seen in an Excel spreadsheet. The individual tables each have primary keys, which are used to uniquely identify a specific row in the table. Those rows of data can also contain foreign keys, which are used to map data from one table to another. This multi-table structure is where SQL gets its power, because we're able to store so much data in an organized way that's easy to navigate once you get your head around it. Next, let's talk about how SQL is actually leveraged and implemented within an organization. We can break this down into 4 stages. The first step is setting up the infrastructure. The company will get a server running, and that server will be dedicated to hosting schemas and tables that will make up your relational database. In the old days, servers were hosted on site, but now it's more typical to run cloud-hosted servers with platforms like Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure. The infrastructure setup phase is typically done by a database administrator or a data engineer. After that, the company will be ready to build their data model. At this stage, we're designing the database, talking about what the business needs are, what tables we'll need, what columns will go into those tables, how they'll relate to one another, and thinking about how we'll populate the schema with data. When we're ready to implement our data model, we'll be running SQL create statements, naming tables and columns, adding constraints to those columns, prescribing data types, and mapping primary to foreign key relationships that will allow our relational database to have its structure between tables. All of this is done using SQL. This step is usually handled by a database administrator or data engineers, but there's a lot of input from data analysts, data scientists, and other stakeholders around the business who want to weigh in on the types of data that the company is going to need to store for its operations. After the data model is set up, we're ready for the next step, which is populating our tables with data. In most cases, this is an ongoing process that sets up automation to bring in data from a variety of sources. You might get information from the use of your web application, from e-commerce transactional data, from information input by your customers, or potentially even third-party sources like marketing channels. This stage is typically handled by your data engineers or database administrators in some cases, and there's also situations where people outside of the data team will be responsible for this. It's not uncommon to have people on the development team with a title of a back-end engineer or a full-stack engineer who will be populating your tables with data. But whoever's working on this, it's all about setting up the infrastructure to collect data in real time in an automated fashion on all of the things that you need to run your business. At this point, the infrastructure's set up, the data model's been built, and we're populating our tables with data. It's on to what I think is the most fun part, the data analysis. This is where data analysts and data scientists start writing SQL queries to pull the data they need from the database. Once they have the data they need, they might use tools like Power BI, Tableau, or Excel to visualize the data to pull out the insights, or they might use statistical tools like R or Python to do modeling work and some predictive analytics. Others might just use SQL alone to get the job done. It really depends on the particular analysis and the skill set of the analyst. Throughout the entire workflow, storing, managing, and querying data in a relational database requires SQL to get the job done. And if you want to build a strong career in data, SQL is and will continue to be one of the cornerstones that will help you be successful. It's extremely widely used, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. I hope you found this video helpful. Like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Drop me a comment if there's something else you'd like to learn, and I hope to see you in the next one.
our students. They are going out and changing the world.
I am constantly amazed at how various people have changed my mind.
They're building networks across the globe and across industries.
Take the move and just do it.
At its core, a database is pretty simple. It's just a place to store and organize your data. And in any business, we can have lots of data. Data about customer orders, shipments, web interactions, and support calls. And we need a place to store that data. That's where a database comes in handy. Now, we need to talk about a few fundamental terms to help us better understand databases: tables, records, fields, and keys. So any database could have one or more tables. This is an example of a table with customer information. It kind of looks like a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. So what it has in the first column is a customer ID, which helps us uniquely identify the customer. This is important because we could have two customers with the same name, and we want to distinguish between those. Also in this customers table, we have their city and their state. Now within each table, records are rows, and fields are columns or variables. So we have in these database tables records and fields that we refer to. We've also got keys. So like the customer ID, that's a key. It helps us uniquely identify information in the tables. So a primary key, you see them here. In the customers table, we have the customer ID. And in the orders table, we have the order ID. Again, they help us uniquely identify those things. We can also have a foreign key, which is basically using a primary key in another table to help provide additional context. So for example, in the orders table, the order ID is the primary key because it helps us uniquely identify the orders. We also include the customer ID because it gives us more context, helps us understand who made that order. Now what's important here is that the foreign key could be listed more than once because a customer could have multiple orders. When the key is a primary key, it should only be listed once, and it helps us uniquely identify information. Those are a few basics about databases. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, click the subscribe button.
Cody Bob.
And if you're interested in a SQL cheat sheet, you can find one.
All right, that's it. That's what we got going. Yeah, hopefully I can start the beginner stuff soon, sooner than later. And just get that rolling, man. Have the coach talk on Thursday, so maybe I'll do that tonight or something. Bang some beginner stuff out today. Hopefully we'll do that. Yeah, that's it for later. Thank you.